All right, welcome to Project 65 Golf. Ryan Fackler, Greg Gibson. We're here to talk today about some wedges.
Yeah.
Dude, come on.
What?
I know you're title of staff, but this is a bit ridiculous. We're trying to be unbiased here.
Oh, okay. All right, I got you.
All right, after a change of clothes, we're back. Are you kidding me still?
What? Oh, I forgot, man. I'm sorry. Yeah.
All right, we're back. Now that we've got the hoodies out of the way, I'm done. I can't work like this. I'm done. It's all time to charm. The hat's fine. We can deal with the hat. We got all the hoodies and shirts out of the way.
Oh, I forgot. Yeah, I brought you one too to wear. I'm just kidding.
Nope. I'll stay agnostic for now. Project 65, welcome. Greg Gibson, Ryan Fackler. We're here to talk about wedge, bounce, and grind today.
Yeah, just wedge fitting in general.
Okay.
It's one piece of the bag that a lot of people, I need new wedges, I'll get these off the rack, and that's fine. I think it's really undervalued and very important, especially when you're considering the bounce and grind of the wedges. Shaft-wise is something with better players that we like to examine. A lot of guys are fine in the stock wedge shafts that are in there. And I think the term stock gets misconstrued. Just because you're getting something off the rack doesn't mean it's bad. I had a guy say it to me really well once who's with one of the major OEMs. It's Titleist. But he said, the stuff that we sell that comes at stock specifications isn't really stock. That's tour proven. Those are the shafts and the numbers and the bounces and the grinds that have proved most successful for the best players on the planet. So once you find the right one within those parameters that fits your game, chances are we don't have to make a huge adjustment. But that being said, these days, just about every company that's selling wedges is offering several different grinds, obviously different bounce angles, and different cambers and shapes on the sole of the golf club. And if you don't know what that stuff means and don't know how it applies to your game, you may be leaving a lot of forgiveness and help on the table when you go to hit wedge shots.
Yeah, I'd say it's interesting. I think, at least from how I feel about it, the most customization possible off the rack is probably available right here on these wedge tables.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Because when you talk about bounces, grinds, just the different lie angles and lofts, like there's so many options. And me personally, I've always kind of done it off feel, sort of what I think that I should go with or what I like the most, but not really put a whole lot of thought behind it.
No question. Yeah, so let's see today if we can do a little better. We're going to just talk through basically what Ryan would be looking for in wedges with a fitter's opinion. So why don't you give me your take on what you think you know about bounce and grind and wedge fitting?
All right, so what I know is in generality, the bounce is essentially the flange on the bottom of the club, and it's either taller or shorter. If it's low bounce, it's shorter and more flat on the bottom of the club. If it's a higher bounce, it's going to keep the club from digging into the turf as much. If it's a lower bounce, it's going to be much closer to the ground, require crisper, cleaner contact.
Yeah, that's pretty much correct. The way I simply say it is the bounce is the degree of difference between the leading edge and the trailing edge. So higher bounce, the higher the leading edge will be with the trailing edge on the ground. The lower the bounce, the lower leading edge ride. So you're right on. So what would you as a player think it would work well for you as far as bounce goes?
So weirdly enough, I have a standard bounce in my gap wedge, but in my lob wedge, I have a very low bounce. Because I went with one lob wedge, I went with a 58 degree. So that allows me to open and shut it as I need to. So if I need to close it down to 56, I can do that. But if I need to open it way up, then I've got the low bounce. I think, like most things, truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Again, that was a feel decision I made. I've had middling success with it, but I've also got a weird wedge path that I'm trying to work out in my game as well. So I'm pretty confident it's not going to be where I stay.
Sure. So your wedge makeup now is pitching wedge, gap wedge, and then a 58 three-wedge system?
Yep.
What's the loft on your pitching wedge?
46.
46, and then your gap is a 52? 52, and then we go to 58.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's gapping-wise, a lot of people say, hey, you're supposed to have 4-degree gaps in there, and he's going 6 degrees from 52 to 58. But if you look at the clubs that are in tour players' bags, you see a lot of guys doing that. And when I'm fitting wedges, the two things that I really key on are what's the pitching wedge loft, because we're going to try and gap out properly down to, most guys are hitting their pitching wedge over 100 yards now. Yeah. So what are we going to have underneath that pitching wedge that's going to make them comfortable in that whatever 90 to 120 yard range for most players. And then the second question, the really important one for me, is what is the club you use most greenside?
Yeah, that's going to be my 58.
Sure, yeah.
Typically.
Yeah, and that's great. So I have no problem with that wedge setup. And keep in mind, though, because you've got a 6-degree gap, we need to have a 52-degree wedge that covers some, a lot more ground, I would say. It's got to be a more versatile club as far as gapping out distances. But the main club I want to key on today is going to be your greenside club, because that's where I think the bounce and grind is the most important. So the next question I'd ask is, do you use your 52 much greenside, or is it pretty much 58, 80+% of the time?
58 would be the majority that I use. I've actually gone to, more recently, I'll take my pitching wedge. If I need to get it on the ground and let it run.
Sure.
Weirdly enough, I found that my 52 checks harder than my 58 sometimes, so I haven't got a whole lot of confidence around there. If I need to get it rolling, I'll go pitching wedge in more of a putter style stroke.
Sure.
And then the 58 is my versatile club. I can hit most shots with it.
Sure. And when you're hitting those bump and runs, generally speaking, you've got some forward shaft lean going on.
Yeah.
So even if it's a higher bounce club, most pitching wedges are in the 8 to 10 range, you're going to be hiding most of that bounce by leaning the shaft forward. That effectively lowers the leading edge.
Yep.
And that's a big thing to keep in mind is players are going to adjust the club based on the shot they're hitting, and that is going to change the effective bounce, how much bounce is actually in play on the golf shot. Phil Mickelson, they're releasing new PM wedge this year from Callaway Golf. It was designed with Roger Cleveland and Phil Mickelson. I think the number's 23 different grind angles he's got on his wedge that allows him to play basically 23 different bounce angles. And he's an exception. He's obviously probably one of the most prolific wedge players
Not Phil.
that we've ever seen. But as we dig into this 58 a little deeper, if you're hitting, say a 60-yard shot with that club, would you classify yourself as pretty steep, going to take a large divot, somewhere in the middle, taking a divot, not a big one, or pretty shallow where you're going to be more clipping the ball off the surface?
If I'm going 60 yards, I'm probably taking a medium-sized divot.
Medium-sized divot, and that's going to be hit with your 58-degree wedge?
Yeah.
Sure. All right, so the next one I'd say, all right, let's say we've got a shot that's going to go from you to the other side of our fitting bay. It's probably about 20 yards. If you have to hit that shot in the air, say it's over a bunker, so we're going to fly it over a bunker. Are you going to lean the club forward and try and nip it and create some spin, or are you going to lay that club open and have more of a slide flop shot type
More
approach?
inclined to lay it open.
Yeah. So I think you're actually on the right track with a low bounce. Is it a Vokey you play?
Yeah, it is.
That's what I'm talking about. So it's an 04.
I wish that was no.
If it's new, it's an 04 L grind would be the low bounce option.
It's a couple years old. It's so I don't know what the grind is.
Let's go see.
Okay. I have no idea on the grind situation. I know it's 8 degrees bounce maybe.
Ooh, that's a K grind. 04 K. An older one, not in play anymore. This is an old club. It's illegal.
Yeah.
There you
go. Yeah. All right, so mine's 58, 04, and you said K. How do you even tell the K?
So this wedge is a little older. Geez, it looks like it's been through a war. Big nick right there.
It has.
Hey, you got to love an old wedge, though. That's good. So trusty rusty, as they say. This Vokey was actually made before the lettering system for grinds was in play.
Okay.
So they made different wedges in these lofts and bounces. They just weren't labeled as such.
Okay.
4 is correct for the bounce, but this is a very wide flange club, and it's got a lot of camber, which is kind of the smile look shape you've got there.
Okay.
And that would be the wider sole pattern versus some others would be narrower.
Okay.
And I'm actually a big fan of this grind. I think it's a lot more versatile than people give it credit for. In general, you think of a wider flange club and you think of the old Alien wedges, or CBX now from Cleveland is a big flange, or Sure Out from Callaway. And they're really more game improvement type wedges that help you get the ball out of the bunker because of that large sole.
One of these guys?
Yeah, exactly. That club's going to be less likely to dig unless you're leaning the shaft forward and you're hiding all the bounce. So a low bounce K grind, I think, are still available, but only through the custom shop in Vokey. But low bounce worries me a little because when you find yourself in thick rough, in bunkers, a lot of times not having enough bounce can lead you to bury the leading edge and hit that shot fat, or even more dangerous. Let's say we've got a ball sitting in the rough, but the ball's not sitting down. It's sitting up higher, longer, fluffier grass. It's not unusual to see a ball in the rough. It's about that high off the actual ground. If you put your finger down to touch the ground, the ball's kind of floating in the rough there.
Yeah.
The danger in low bounce is if you imagine no bounce here, you could easily slide that club so far under the ball that your contact point is going to be really high on the face.
Done it.
And it's going to change the way that ball comes out versus if it's hit, down further on the scoring lines. So that's the danger in low bounce for me, is when you've got that ball a variable distance off the ground, you have to be a lot more precise. Now, when you're trying to slide the leading edge, you've got an advantage. And this is where a guy with basically playing a one greenside wedge might be at a bit of a disadvantage. For example, I play a 55 and a 60-degree wedge. One of them is a very high bounce option, allowing me to have something when that ball's floating to prevent the ball from being hit high in the face. And the other has got a very big relief pattern ground off the back, so I can get that leading edge lower when I want to hit a high shot. But for what you're doing, honestly, I think you stumbled into something very, very good. We obviously know that the club can't be perfect for every situation.
Right.
But for what you're doing, I think this addresses a lot. It's not going to be bad out of bunkers because of the wider flange, and the camber of the sole is going to allow you to get it to ride low when you need to hit a flop shot.
I thought through it pretty well, but again, I just ordered that offline. I didn't even hit it, so it's been years, obviously, since I bought that. But again, it was one of those things where come in, buy it off the rack based on what you think you want, but not necessarily knowing if that's the best thing for you.
Yeah, well, it's worked out pretty well. And my guess would be that if you're a pretty serious golfer, which I know you are, you would have found out pretty quick if it was showing deficiencies in lots of parts of the bag, and you would have kept searching. But a lot of times, a quick discussion with a fitter who knows what they're talking about, you can kind of figure out what you really need. Higher bounce is going to prevent you from either sticking the thing in the ground or from having the ball run high up on the face. Basically, your high bounce options, when you're being aggressive down and through the ball, the sooner the trailing edge of the club gets in the ground, that's when it's going to start bouncing or forcing the club back up. So if you're a little imprecise on your hit, rather than hit it way high or way low on the grooves, it's just going to kind of move the club into the golf ball earlier and help you with that contact point.
So I think based on that point, while this may be versatile for me around the green, it might have also set me back on wedge progression as far as skill goes, because I've learned to get shallow and more open and closed through it, because if I were to dig in even just a little bit on this,
club's not going to give you any help.
Bounce, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and that actually happens a lot. It's not just in wedges, but especially in drivers or whatever. A guy comes in with a club that wasn't fitted for him and really is not a great club for him, and he has adjusted his swing or his approach or his mindset, his skill set basically, to match the improper piece of equipment. And once you get the knowledge on the table and they understand, those guys are usually able to kind of right the tracks. Once they get the right piece of equipment, they can go back and get the flaw out of their swing. But you hate to see a guy struggle with something that really was brought on by a bad fit.
Yeah. So we talked about bounce. Tell me a little bit about the grinds, because that's something I've never really paid a whole lot of attention to.
Sure. And the confusing part about grind is that all the companies basically are doing it. They're all just labeling it a different way. There's no universal
I've heard
system.
High Toe, I think TaylorMade does with theirs. Titleist has all the different lettering systems. There's no standardization to it.
Callaway's got lettering too, and Ping has got different soles they offer. So there's a wide sole and a standard sole and a CS maybe, I can't remember.
Okay, so let's connect the dots. What is the grind and why does it matter?
In general, so picture a guy actually sitting at a grind wheel. Let's see if I got a good example here. Something with some relief carved into it. Unless Mizuno's good. So I don't even know if they labeled theirs. Some companies are not labeling. They are just pairing certain bounces with certain grinds. So the 6010 in this Mizuno S18 wedge has got, if you can picture a grind wheel, it was a straight sole here for a while. And then at the grind wheel, they actually carve little bits off the back of the wedge around the heel, a little bit less through the middle of the club, and then a little more on the toe. So if you consider if that was a right angle coming out and hard down and you laid the club open, the leading edge is higher in the air. So the more relief grind you have around the heel, the lower you're able to ride the leading edge.
So the grind would essentially affect how the club sits at address, whether toe up or toe down.
It more has to do with the manipulation of the face. When you're opening and shutting the face, how much effective bounce are you now having? Because when it's square, you've got a certain bounce angle. But if you raise the level of the grip, you're going to hide a lot of that bounce, especially if you've got toe relief. Or if you lower the grip, lower the grip and open the face, now you're going to be able to get that leading edge to ride lower versus higher. And again, it's kind of depends on the situation. Sometimes I want that leading edge riding higher when I've got a ball sitting fluffy in a rough or in a bunker.
Right.
But when I've got something I've got to get off a tight lie, and that's where you see a lot of good players, mid to high level amateurs. that have mid-bounce clubs because they are able to then manipulate and get the bounce they want for the certain shot. You look at the way Phil sets up so differently. Yeah. His has been ground a little more custom, but it's the same idea. You can hide or activate bounce depending on how you address the shot. And now we're moving more into where golf instruction comes in and less in fitting. But in general, if a guy says, I do everything with my 56-degree wedge around the green, I probably want to put that guy in a mid-bounce with some type of relief grind so he can have bounce, hide bounce, and be versatile with that golf club.
Okay, and that's what I was. There's a lot of finesse involved in the short game. So I guess my number one question would be, how do you decide what is best for you when you talk about bounce and grind? Because it's not like we come out here on a TrackMan and blast a bunch of shots and the numbers pretty much show themselves.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever asked somebody to hit a 9-yard chip on TrackMan to look at it. That's a good point. So my interview process goes kind of like this. I ask you a question about how steep or shallow you are from 60 yards. I ask you a question, if you're hitting a 20-yard shot, how are you going to approach that shot? You know, and obviously there's going to be situational differences,
right?
But in general, and then the big one that a lot of people don't think to ask is, what golf course do you play? Because if you're a member at a place, especially we're in Kentucky where you've got, you know, Valhalla down the street has got bent grass, which is what you're going to see all the way up north in Michigan.
Right.
And then you can go to another golf course that has Zoysia and Bermuda, which are playing down south.
Yep.
And the ball sits very differently on those grasses. So if I have a guy who really needs to be aggressive down and through it, playing on bent grass all the time, if he's a steep guy playing on bent, that guy's going to need a ton of bounce. You know, versus somebody who likes to be more open with it and hit the ball high, but he plays on Zoysia, where the ball is usually sitting up like it's on a tee. I may not go as low with that guy as you would think, just based on the fact that he's a sweeper, because he's going to see a lot of balls sitting up off the ground, and as we talked about, hitting it high on the face, you're going to get a very different ball flight and spin than you would if you hit it solid.
Okay. So what's the general rule for somebody looking to purchase new wedges? One, talk to a fitter, or talk to somebody knowledgeable about golf and doing these types of things. But high bounce versus low bounce, high relief versus low relief.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to everything. I think if anybody watched this video and then turned the camera back on themselves and thought, how steep am I when I'm hitting partial wedge shots? How steep am I when I'm within 60 yards of the green? What do I like to do when I'm just off the green? Do I prefer to open the club and hit it high in the air? Or do I like to get my hands leaning forward and hit down and nip it and create some spin? And I think based on everything we've talked about, they ought to be able to figure out at least pretty close where they belong. Yep. And when in doubt, if you've got an option to say buy a club online at discount or something, mid-bounce is not a bad place to be. The thing that surprised me the most when I went through this process, I was actually lucky enough. I did it at TPI at Oceanside, California, at the Titleist Fitting Center with Bob Vokey himself. And what they forced us to do is go to stations and hit golf shots with wedges that you may not think are for that situation. We get a 12-degree K grind, which is a large camber, high bounce club. You'd think it'd be very hard to hit open face flop shots out of the fairway. I was able to do it really, really well. And the last thing I would tell you is if you have an opportunity to do some demoing, a lot of golf courses are going to have, even if it's small, 6, 8, 10 wedges that are designated as demos that you can take out, even if it's just at the chipping green, and hit some shots greenside. And that's where you're going to see the most influence of the bounce on the grind, is when you're hitting short, manipulated shots from within 20 yards around the green. When you get into more full swings, you're talking about a 54-degree wedge you mostly hit full shots with, or a gap wedge. Some people are carrying pitching wedges now that match their wedge set versus their iron set. The simple look for me is what kind of grass you're playing on. If you have a bunch of high lies, on Zoysia or Bermuda that's not mown real tight in this region, you're going to want to have a higher bounce option. Or if you're a very steep player in general and you're taking pelts every time you hit wedges, higher bounce is going to be better.
So that's like my 52 is primarily my 110, 115.
So for you, that's probably not a full swing, but it's at least an 85 or 90% swing probably.
Yeah, that's just been my comfortable distance. If I hit it farther than that, one, I chew up a golf ball and chalk that up. And two, I just get too much backspin on it.
Yeah.
It's just my attack angle and the way I hit it.
So you're more consistent in the 110 to 115 range?
It's a good stock swing for me, and it's a nice gap. Anything other than that, I'll either feather a pitching wedge, or this is 98 yards. If I have a 98-yard shot,
confident.
Just bread and butter.
Going to town.
Anywhere in there.
Yeah. So that definitely, I would want to have something softer and heavier shaft-wise, like with the stocker in there. I mean, they do a really good job, tour proven, not just stock. in shaft. But in your 52-degree wedge, I would consider next time you look at that, maybe matching that shaft to your irons, or at least making it closer. You play extra stiff shafts, Project X65s in your irons, maybe look at a Project X60 that is very similar in feel and performance, but a little softer because you're not always going to be going full out at it like you might a 7-iron or something. But
are there options to test those clubs typically, or most?
It's harder. It's definitely harder. I mean, even with the level of fitting resources that we have, I currently have a Vokey fitting bag here that's for the state of Kentucky, our territory. It kind of rests here when our rep's not using it. So I've got the ability to build 54-degree wedges, different bounces, different grinds with different shafts. And do some fitting there. But in general, we can kind of piggyback off of what, say, your pitching wedges. If you're hitting 3/4 pitching wedges, we can figure out the loft gapping. About 4 yards per degree of loft is what you're going to see. Yeah. And we'll figure out if your spin, launch, land angle numbers are appropriate there and then be able to match in 52. Then we could hit shots with the 52 of the stock and then kind of do a little math and get there. It's not feasible for every fitting studio to have every possible resource. Yeah. But if you've got fitters who are informed and enough equipment, you can get close. A lot of times we can do enough good math to figure out which is going to be better for what you need the golf club for.
Okay. All right, so stay tuned. We will be doing a wedge fitting for me and maybe for somebody else as well.
Yeah.
Just so we can talk through that and you can actually see the process. It might need to be a little warmer so we can get outside and do some actual real-world testing and results, which is obviously ideal. One pitfall I would say to watch out for, and that's honestly, weirdly enough, how I stumbled into this one, when you go online and you're looking for the deals, most of the deals from previous season's wedges or things like that are going to be in the less popular configurations as far as bounce and grind are considered. So I bought the 52, and I wanted a matching wedge, and the 58 was the loft I had settled on, but it only came in low bounce. And so in a way, I almost kind of tricked myself into, I think this will be more versatile for me anyways. Because previously I had a 3-wedge system, so I had a 50, 56, and 60. Mm-hmm. And I would get around the green, and I just got paralyzed because you have 97 options for every single shot. And it was just taking me way too long to think through it. I was never confident to pull the trigger on any given one, and I'd suffered as a result. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to simplify this. And I found a deal on the 52, and then I saw the 58, and I was like, well, the only option left for bounce at this price is the low bounce. I guess that makes sense. I can open it or I can shut it and increase or decrease my effective loft. And it worked out, but just because something is $20 off doesn't mean it's worth sacrificing your game for if you don't know why you're buying that.
That's a really good point. Keep in mind, a lot of people don't know what's best for them yet. Hopefully with content like this and what other guys are doing, and fitting in golf has come a long way just in the in the 15 years I've been teaching golf. But you just find out what's best for you, and if the budget allows, golf clubs are a pretty long-term investment. Yeah. Just because some manufacturer says every 75 rounds you need to replace your wedges, it doesn't mean it's true. I generally keep wedges in my bag, and I'm a guy who's got access to pretty much whatever I want golf club wise. But I'm going to play wedges for at least 2 or 3 years before I make replacements. If you're worried about your grooves wearing out, one thing you can do is hit the used section, hit the internet, whatever, and find duplicates of your wedges in used. And when you're hitting shots on the range warming up with a 56-degree wedge, if you have basically a backup that's more worn out and you hit shots there, you're going to save the grooves on your gamer. Now, obviously, I endorse when you're practicing greenside, you're not going to do as much damage to your grooves, and there you're going to want the proper reaction. Practice with the golf ball you play. Practice with your gamer wedge. But if you're just pounding balls out to the 100-yard sign, hitting 3-stripe pinnacle range balls, if you've got a backup wedge, you can wear the grooves on that thing. It'll really extend the life of your gamer, and you can usually pick up used wedges in the $30 to $50 range, even if they're...
That's a good point. I never really thought about doing that.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned a lot. Wedge fitting is something that's very undervalued. Don't forget about lie angle. That's one thing we didn't cover.
Yeah.
So lastly, I'll throw in lie angle. Understand that the lie angle will affect what the divot looks like. If the club's flatter, the toe's more on the ground, the divot will be more toe heavy. Vice versa, if the toe's too far in the air, you'll have heel heavy divots. Don't get too caught up in making your divots look good. Look at your dispersion, especially when you're hitting your gap wedge, your pitching wedge. When you're hitting those full shots, if your entire shot pattern is left or your entire shot pattern is right, you can adjust where the loft of the club is pointing by bending lie angle. If you miss a bunch of greens to the left, try going to someone and having your wedge bent 2 degrees flat. You may not have to change your golf swing at all. That may just put that dispersion pattern right right on the green where you're looking instead of to the left. When you get into your greenside club, it's more about where you're comfortable because you're going to do so much manipulation anyways, hitting those small shots. But in the full swing wedges, the ones you hit longer shots with, get your lie angle to help you with dispersion. Divots are not near as important as where the golf ball finishes.
That's true. Very true. All right, well, hope we all learned a lot. I did, personally. I'm looking forward to learning more about this topic. But, Greg, appreciate the insight as always.
Always, man.
Yeah.
Project 65, we're getting there.
We are. It's wintertime.
Oh,
Fucking
my back
where's
just
the
cracked 9
sun?
times.